from NPR stations. Other contributors include Mathnasium, committed to boosting students' confidence, critical thinking, and math grades and scores with in-person or online instruction. Each student follows a customized learning plan. More at mathnasium.com.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to KUOW's Week in Review. I'm your host, Bill Radke, and I know some local journalists, and they have years of experience in knowing what's going on in this region and how it works, and they follow the news, and they know what happened, and they know why you ought to be up on the news too. So we call it Week in Review, and we get together and enjoy an hour together. I'm talking about political analyst and contributing columnist Joni Balter. Hiya, Joni.
Hi there. Hi, everybody.
Seattle Times investigations editor Jonathan Martin. Hi, Jonathan. I'm not hearing Jonathan yet. Did you all hear him? Jonathan, see if you can work that out. Okay, he's working on it, perhaps. Let's see. Publicola's co-founder and editor Erica Barnett. Hi, Erica.
Hello, hello.
I hear you just fine. Okay, so we're going to have Jonathan join us ASAP. Jonathan, did anything work out yet? Say hi if you heard me.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello.
It's getting better. Okay.
Okay.
Welcome everybody. And by the way, you can always watch the show. Not that it doesn't sound great, because it does, but you can watch the show on social media. We're on YouTube and Facebook. You just search for KUOW Public Radio. Okay. First topic. You all know about the Florida governor sending migrants to Martha's Vineyard, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, he had people round up Venezuelan asylum seekers on the streets of San Antonio and then misleadingly lured them onto private planes to Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. Well, the Republican Governors Association is asking its donors, hey, what liberal town should we send migrants to next? San Francisco, Minneapolis, Philadelphia, or Seattle? I know this because Seattle Times columnist Danny Westneat wrote, hey, send them here. We'll take them. We want them. I asked the mayor's office, do you want asylum seekers from Texas sent here? And they said they are absolutely welcome here. The city already shelters people in weather emergencies and, quote, we are leveraging that system for immediate migrant mass arrivals. Joni, you suggested we discuss this. Do you expect this scenario to happen?
Well, it depends on how many migrants need to be sent and, what the plan is. I mean, I personally wish Governor Ron DeSantis would work on his hurricane and not this, because he's just making political points. I think it's important for all of us to recognize that these are people, not toys or things that you move around with some dishonesty, as it turns out, to make a political point. So start with that. But I do agree heartily with Danny Westneat. I think the idea of a welcome mat in this situation is a good idea for Washington State, and it goes back some time. Our history with this, going back to another member of the Republican Governors Association, Dan Evans, and that is going back some time. But those of us who know this story, have read this story, know that years ago we welcomed Vietnamese and Laotian migrants at the time, and it worked out really well for both the state's economy and for those migrants themselves. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at some of the businesses here in Washington and Seattle and everywhere where they're talking about sending them, they need workers for certain things. And so it could be a very good match. And I think that's what the mayor's office is saying. And I think that's what Danny Westneat was saying.
The mayor's office told me there is a meeting scheduled next week with immigrant and refugee and housing and homelessness service providers, quote, to discuss how we can collaborate to serve our guests should they arrive in busloads. We are working with partners to identify intermediate housing options that will not impact ongoing homelessness response efforts. Erica, do you think that housing response would be to the detriment of people already looking for housing in Seattle?
Well, I mean, it depends on, the volume that we're talking about. And let's be clear. I mean, this is still sort of a remote scenario at this point. But, if you're talking about a few hundred people, then no. I mean, I think that, and I spoke to the mayor's office as well and to King County, which is actually the place that has some of these housing options, they've bought a number of hotels for their health through housing program. And in the very short term, those could be used for refugee housing, and they already are being used for refugees, for Afghan refugees and Ukrainian refugees. So I think that on a small scale, we're fine in the short term. Planning is going on with the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, the Office of Emergency Management. I think if we were to get to a scenario like, a Seattle scale version of what's happening in New York, I think that we'd be facing some really tough challenges. I mean, in New York City, Eric Adams is talking about putting people on cruise ships and, in these kind of mass shelter situations, which are not good long-term solutions. I think that the city needs to be planning for all types of scenarios, including, a longer term scenario where people don't necessarily want to end up, on the edge of the country. That a lot of folks have, family elsewhere, and so they're going to have to deal with transportation. And it's a big emergency planning situation, and the city and county have certainly started working on it, but I don't know that they're ready for 60,000 people, to show up like has happened in New York.
The irony is that for asylum seekers like the Venezuelans that were flown up to Martha's Vineyard, if they were in their asylum petitions in the northern jurisdictions are much more likely to be approved than they are in the southern jurisdictions. So by DeSantis flying these folks up here, the chance of them becoming long-term, permanent residents is much higher. The transactional records Access Clearinghouse track database at Syracuse, I pulled this morning, has the asylum approval rates for Seattle is like 3 times the rate for El Paso, and the highest rates of approval for asylum seekers and Venezuelans. I think automatically or very, very easily are declared asylum seekers because the situation in Venezuela would be much better off having their claims heard in New York, in San Francisco, Virginia, Philadelphia, and Seattle.
Yeah. We asked our group of KUOW listeners, our community feedback club, their opinion. I asked what would you do in such a situation, and there was overwhelming support from these listeners for housing and helping asylum seekers, and not just in Seattle. We heard from Dennis in Bremerton and Tommy in Poulsbo and Alicia on the East Side, and on. Many of them from religious groups who help migrants and refugees. Erica, are you? I think last time I used the word like skeptical, and you said, "Well, I didn't say I was skeptical." But what is your response to such outpouring of hospitality?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. I think that, when I read Danny Westneat's column about, we're a welcoming place and we would love to take in, as many refugees as DeSantis and Abbott and whoever send us. I think that there is a short-term impulse to, and a very good one to provide shelter and provide temporary housing. The question is, if we're looking at thousands of asylum seekers wanting to move to Seattle, Westneat's column said, it's great. We have a little Saigon, and maybe we'll have little Kabul or little, I can't read Caracas. And I think that language is very telling, because there is a question about where people will go. And is it, are we going to be welcoming, of refugees wanting to move into single family neighborhoods? Are we going to be willing to provide housing? Because, there's competition for housing. And, I don't want to see it become a situation where it's, where will we put homeless housing? Will we invest in that, or will we invest in refugees who we tend to humanize more? So I think that, long term, when you're talking about a large influx of people, no matter who they are, it leads to conflicts. And, there isn't a neighborhood where we can just say, here's where they all go. So those conflicts down the line would be inevitable if this scenario does come to pass. And I think we have to be realistic about that.
Well, let me just say, of course, it depends on the number and the timing of the number. So, and I wrote down a way different number than you did, Erica, but I was going very quickly, so you might want to check me. But the number that went to Martha's Vineyard, if I'm not mistaken, was 48. That is pretty doable, isn't it? And then the number that Eric Adams seemed to be concerned about, I wrote down closer to 1,100. but if I'm wrong, let me know. And even that, I mean, again, it's going to be the timing and what housing is available and who can make connections for jobs and for families to have access, to schools and things like that. So of course it has to do with the volume, but what we're saying and what I'm saying and what it seems to be that Danny Westneat's saying is bring them on, let's do it right. And I want to be proud of my city and state for doing that.
Well, and Joni, your point that the connections, having people be connected here, it goes to basically the whole intent of what DeSantis was trying to do here in Abbott. And they were trying to troll liberal cities. They weren't trying to have a clear pipeline of moving people, out of their area, particularly picking sanctuary. These are sanctuary jurisdictions that should, of course, welcome anybody in, and just trying to. So if there was an actual organized pipeline of people where there's a predictable flow and all that kind of thing, then I think
right. But it's a political statement, and so maybe that means exactly. We're a couple of weeks away for them stopping their little stunts. But the broader message is welcome.
I just on the numbers real quick. I think my 60,000 number that was the number of people that are in the main shelter system in New York City. So far, there have been 17,000 people coming into New York City, and they expect up to 100,000. And in Martha's Vineyard, I think it was 11,000. But these are bigger numbers than we're likely to see here in Seattle. Certainly, 100 or a couple hundred we could easily accommodate. And this is all very hypothetical at this point.
Okay, we're gonna move on and talk about other topics here. I just want to give voice. I'll give the last word to some of our community feedback club members. Will says, I see parallels between the Republican governor's treatment of migrants to Western Washington's elected Democrats' treatment of people experiencing homelessness. Both the migrants and people experiencing homelessness are extremely vulnerable populations in need of compassion and services. However, both are often characterized as lazy, dirty criminals and drug addicts. Is there a moral difference between sending a busload of migrants from the border to Seattle and sweeping people experiencing homelessness from one park to another? How is this different from cities like Mercer Island, driving people experiencing homelessness from the island to Seattle without providing any services? Phyllis says parts of the country's business sector want illegal immigration because it can be very cheap, fairly accessible labor. Farm workers, construction workers, meat cutting workers. Otherwise, we would have more legal avenues for immigrant labor and a legislative answer to this problem. And Joyce on the Olympic Peninsula says, I would welcome the migrants. I can't find anyone in the landscape business who's competent, arrives on schedule, and doesn't charge me $25 an hour to not pull weeds by their roots, just cut them off. Just a few of the, I thought that would get at least a visual reaction from America. And it really did from all.
I raised an eyebrow at that last one.
You did.
We were all quite visual on
that. Yes.
You were. We got, so anyway, if you want to be part of the Community Feedback Club, just text us at 206-926-9955. That's 926-9955. Just text the word club. Okay, speaking of governments controlling people's movements, Erica, King County has said it will close its youth detention center by 2025. You've written about that this week. How's that going?
Well, so this is a promise that Dow Constantine, King County executive, made during in 2020 amid the protests against police brutality. And how's it going? Well, we've roughly doubled the number of people of kids who are in the, I'm going to call it the youth jail just for brevity, instead of using the acronyms that the county prefers. So there's about roughly 42 kids, up from about 17 at the lowest point in August of last year. So these are small numbers regardless, but there's definitely been very slow progress, if any, on moving toward closing down this facility. There's questions about, do we want to be, do we need to have a place, where kids who've committed kind of the worst crimes and don't have good alternatives to be securely detained? What should that look like? If so, should it be a house? There's a so-called Michigan model where it's a little more like group housing. And of course, the youth jail just opened in February of this year. So this is, the new youth detention center that is that it's on its way to closure. So I think there's a lot of questions about whether this is very realistic. The prosecutor's office certainly doesn't, told me that they don't believe that it is realistic. And meanwhile, the whole process has moved over to the social service arm of the county from the jail arm, and they took over a couple months ago. So it's it's slow going. And meanwhile, just like the adult jail, the juvenile jail is hemorrhaging staff, extremely short staffed, and that's causing all kinds of problems like the increased use of solitary confinement, which I wrote about this week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Erica has been reporting on this, I know, specifically, and learning about it. I'll ask you, and also Jonathan and Joni have some experience on this topic in general. I'm wondering whether you see what connection, if any, you see between our local politicians making, you could call them unfulfilled promises, you could call them unrealistic visions, but this idea that we're going to move away from jailing, we're going to move away from policing. What connection do you see? Do you see naivete or dishonesty? Or this is the pandemic's fault? This is the supply chain's fault? What should our listeners make of this?
Well, I'll say there was some promises made in the heat of things that are always going to bump into reality. How about that? That, it's a good idea. Well, it's a great idea. These kids should not be in solitary confinement. And that does speak to the labor issue we were discussing just a few minutes ago, that we need workers for this to avoid that. That's very simple. We should not be doing that. And I think we probably all agree on that. On the long-term goal, what I think wasn't well communicated, or maybe needs to be better explained, is how you go from building this new facility to wanting to completely replace the work that it does. That's going to take some work and some time. And so maybe the timing is going to work and I'm missing something, but I doubt it's going to work.
Can I jump in really quick? I just want to correct myself on air. I said that it opened February of this year or earlier this year.
No,
it opened earlier in the year that the county executive promised to close it in 2020. So just want to correct myself.
Yeah, but even so, just folks know that they were taxed. They had to pay for it. It had all this, a little bit of fanfare when it was going to be a thing, and then quite the pivot for we're not going to use it. Mm-hmm. And I think there needs to be some better communication on that. So folks understand they built a building and now we're going to do something different. And I'm not challenging the goal of that at all. I just think it needs to be better explained.
Yeah, it's clear that the youth jail pledge by Dow, it did hit into some reality because it was made in the midst of a very concerted and I think effective advocacy effort by the No Youth Jail folks that were really had launched a very coordinated campaign. When I was reporting on the youth jail now a few years ago, most of the kids that were in there for violent offenses. They were not having kids overnight or any periods of time for lower level offenses. There was at times in the past, there were kids in there for what they called status offenses, which were like running away. And even in some cases, truancy in other parts of the state kids have been jailed for that. They'd really moved away from the status offenses. So I think going to Joni's point about what kind of services you're going to provide both for public safety and for these kids that are caught up in oftentimes very serious charges and, up to murder. What are you going to doing to make sure the kids are themselves safe and that the community is safe? And I just don't think that this is kind of, there's the same way that the defund pledges were made in the midst of the racial justice protests in 2020. There wasn't really a clear thought process articulated about what a 50% reduction, I think, when some of the council members pledged, what that actually meant. I think in the same
in fairness, now some of them want out of it, although they haven't stated it clearly or well enough for my purposes. They want out of that.
It's much easier for a politician to make a pledge that appeals to a progressive or for an advocacy group than it is to actually then do the hard policy work and budget work to actually fulfill that.
Eric,
to
any
be-
final thoughts?
Yeah, to be clear, I mean, this is a somewhat smaller ask when you're talking about, a couple dozen kids. And I think that, no one is proposing to simply close down the jail and let, and replace it with nothing. I think that is a much easier ask, although not an easy one than defunding the police, which, now the debate is how can we best refund the police, and the police, of course, were never actually defunded. But I think it is a lift. I think it is a lift that is, it could be achieved. There are places that have achieved 0 female youth detention. So they're working on it. I just, I'm a little skeptical about the timeline and how things are going so far.
An adjacent topic here, there are groups that King County contracts with to help find alternatives to youth jail. This week, KUOW published an investigation into one of those subcontractors. Salim Robinson runs a county-funded youth outreach, or has been county-funded, youth outreach program called Renegades for Life. Jonathan, turns out he misrepresented himself to the county, and it sounds like it wasn't very hard to do.
Yeah, the contractor that Ann Dornfeld wrote about, which, and by the way, as a consumer of investigative news, this was really good work by Ann.
And it was so well written too.
Yeah, very clear.
I agree.
Yeah, and he had a history that was relatively clear, multiple name changes and multiple serious criminal cases, including juvenile. He was on the sex offender registry, and this resonated with me because when I was editing the Project Homeless team, we saw again and again some fundamental lapses in grant management. King County and Seattle on the human services side are mostly outsourcers. They do contracts with nonprofits, and they outsource the services. And we certainly saw I saw in the homeless services world, and then also editing a story on the Best Starts for Kids levy, where it is also a tremendously large grant making operation. The contract management just really didn't follow with the amount of public money that was going out. So when you see that they didn't have a routine background checking requirement for this type of service, it wasn't terribly surprising. It's surprising, it's shocking. Of course, you should make sure that people working with youth using public dollars pass the kind of routine background checking that teachers and social services workers of the state, everybody would have to comply with. But it does go to a theme for me in seeing how the Seattle and King County manage these kind of contracts.
By the way, the county's contractor that oversees this sort of subcontractor told us yesterday that they have terminated Robinson's contract.
And also, didn't they decide that they're gonna require background checks?
Yes.
This is so obvious that this needs to be done, and it's not a heavy lift. And sort of thanks to Ann Dornfeld for writing this, so we can make this change like this. We don't need to spend a lot of time thinking about it.
That's what we call a high impact investigative story. The change is immediate.
Eric,
I think
that's the answer.
Well, I don't know that that this is something that the county. I do think it would be a heavy lift for the county to ensure background checks for every single subcontractor of every single contractor that they have, because that's probably thousands.
What about people who deal with young people? Let's just start right there. We can do that.
Sure,
that's doable.
Sure. So yeah, not disputing that's important, but that might be something that needs to be required of contractors. And in this case, the direct contractor is a group called Community Passageways. And I think, pulling back a little bit, I agree with everything everybody's saying about that. That story was amazing. It was so well written. And I was jealous of some of the writing, just because it was wow, she just picked the right details. And just a masterclass in investigative reporting. Big picture, I think that this is going to be potentially really bad for some other programs that are just getting off the ground, like restorative community pathways, because that community passageways, boy, it's a lot of similar names, is one of the big contractors under that program. Dow Constantine and the county prosecutor Dan Satterberg were standing in front of community passageways and some of its kids that it's helped at a recent press conference on why this program is good, and and it's being attacked, restorative community pathways, by folks like Jim Farrell, who's running for prosecutor, saying that there's no accountability. And I think stories like this definitely contribute to that narrative, and concern around accountability. But again, just an absolutely amazing story. And I hope that she follows up, because I've got lots of questions that raised for me about the contracting process.
Well, before we take a break here on Week in Review, one more adjacent topic. I saw that the Seattle Police Department has fired an officer who was harassing and mocking people with a fake Twitter account. And my reaction was, well, wouldn't any police chief have fired that guy? Or is this especially telling about Eric? I think was it Eric that brought this up. I think is this especially telling about the newly chosen police chief, Adrian Diaz?
Well, I mean, is it especially telling? No, I mean, I think Diaz is a pretty status quo pick for police chief. That said, I think it is sending a symbolic message to police officers and to the public that, when you have somebody who's really, I mean, this guy was, mocking the death of protesters, mocking George Floyd. And he's also had 10 other complaints. So, I think it sends a message that at least really bad cops, Diaz is going to take action. And, I mean, he reportedly terminated his own brother who was on the force for not obeying COVID protocols. So, that was not widely publicized. I wrote about it a little bit, but, I think it sends a message. So in that sense, I do think it's potentially impactful.
Well, I know that Seattle has a bunch of officers vacancies. They want to hire new officers. They want to change the culture. Is there such a thing as a progressive police academy, like the Evergreen State College of Police Academies, that only graduates progressive cops, and liberal cities can just recruit from there?
My colleague Sarah Jean Green wrote this week about a program called Before the Badge. These are people that are either pre-recruits or in the early recruitment stage, going out and spending time in the community with the groups they're going to be policing, which seems like a great idea, and it seems actually kind of such a good idea. Kind of surprised it didn't happen before. Yeah. So if you're going to have a more culturally sensitive police, go ahead, Joni.
No, go ahead. You finish your sentence, but I have something to add.
Yeah. And one thing I would say too is that, it's one thing to fire one officer, but what we've found is that weeding out one officer from all policing is more of a work in progress. The state has this decertification process where you have to have a certification to carry a badge and a gun. And the decertification process has been very weak in Washington for a long time. One of my reporters, Mike Riker, wrote about that they had never decertified a cop for misuse of force. That process is strengthening a little bit, but absent a better decertification process, it very well could be this officer that was fired from SPD could just go hop to another department nearby, and there's not really a check on that, absent a police chief or a sheriff deciding to have very vigorous background checking for their recruitment process.
So a few really quick points here. First of all, any chief would have fired this particular individual. But what's not very well known, and I'm sort of challenging you, Erica, on status quo, is that Diaz has already fired and disciplined and moved around quite a few officers. He doesn't beat his chest so much and talk a lot, but that's actually true. And then also this Before the Badge program that you brought up, Jonathan, it's Diaz's idea, so it's a change. And I think it's so interesting that what you would do is send officers out into the community first and sort of train them. And who are these people? And who will you be policing? By flipping the order and then going to regular police training, I just think it's really a new idea. And from what I'm understanding, you have police departments around the country and even the Department of Justice calling up and saying, hey, we want to know more. So it is a change move. And we can also give them credit for that, I think.
Team, we're in like the 6th inning of this show. And if we're going to end this show with a victory, it's going to be like a walk-off home run in the bottom of the end of the show. So we've got to take a break and come back with energy, with more of KUOW's Week in Review. Right back.
Support for KUOW comes from UW Medicine, celebrating the new Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center, an independent organization that serves as UW Medicine's cancer program, bringing cancer care and research closer together to help benefit patients. More at uwmedicine.org/cancer.
Every day we're hit with headlines, hot takes, TikToks, and tweets. But when it's time to go deeper, all you have to do is listen. Join me, Kim Malcolm, and All Things Considered as we bring you in-depth news and maybe even a story that surprises you. Listen to All Things Considered every weekday afternoon on KUOW, starting at 3.
Support for KUOW comes from the Corporate Bankruptcy, Restructuring, and Finance Group at Ryan Swanson Law, celebrating 125 years of serving clients in the Northwest, guiding businesses through complex bankruptcies, receiverships, and other insolvency matters. Learn more at ryanswansonlaw.com.
KUOW's Week in Review this week is Publicola's Erica Barnett, the Seattle Times' Jonathan Martin, political analyst Joni Balter. I'm Bill Radke, and this hour we've been talking quite a bit about some of the issues like homelessness that Seattle has become infamous for, crime being another. And I bring this up because, Joni, you were telling me that the Republican U.S. Senate challenger to Patty Murray seems to be running against the city of Seattle. How is Tiffany Smiley trying to tie Patty Murray to increased crime?
I just want to say before I start that, when you talk about a Senate race, especially one as heated as this, that many people see the world differently. They, or even I, might go easier on a candidate that we agree with, and more than one I don't agree with, or we don't agree with. Anyway, so running against Seattle, it's a long story tradition, and that previously has not worked. So going back in time, Slade Gorton running against Maria Cantwell for the U.S. Senate. She tried it. Now that's going back a while, but it didn't work. And I'll tell you why it didn't work. It's because people across the state like Seattle for different reasons. You were just talking Mariners, sports, arts, visits, and just general pride. You could argue that it's, that love has weakened a little bit because of some of the actions by the Seattle City Council on defund. I don't think it's going to work this time either, but I will say that Tiffany Smiley is sort of running a sort of spirited campaign, and maybe in another state it might work.
Erica, Tiffany, sorry, did I miss a hand raised? Maybe I did. Okay. So meanwhile, Senator Murray is, and many Democrats are running against the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And Smiley the Republican has said that she would oppose a nationwide abortion law, would vote to continue to fund Planned Parenthood and give women access to health care and contraception. So Erica, is Senator Murray exaggerating that issue, exaggerating how threatened Washington state abortion rights really are?
Well, first, I want to say, I think that this sort of anti-Seattle thing is also part of a nationwide strategy. And a lot of Tiffany Smiley's strategies are very similar to those in other cities, of demonizing cities as sort of hellscapes of crime and homelessness and decay and, the lack of morality, et cetera. I do think that, I've seen Smiley's ad saying that she would not support a nationwide abortion ban. I think that when that nationwide abortion ban comes up, if it does, and if she was in the Senate, she would support it. And I think I think it's very hard to imagine in this particular political climate, a Jamie Herrera Butler style, very conservative Republican bucking the trend in the Senate, among Republicans and saying, I'm going to be an iconoclast. I think she would probably find a way to explain why she was not contradicting herself. Perhaps would be an exemption for the life of the woman or something like that. And you can say that's not a real nationwide abortion ban. But I think these ads are designed to calm down people in Washington State in particular. But, I don't see this first time candidate as, some major iconoclast who's going to go against the system that is helping pay for these ads. And, some of her other ads are just, wacky Republican conspiracy theories, stadiums full of IRS agents coming to force you to pay for rich kids' law degrees, just bizarre stuff. So no, I do think abortion is very much in danger. I think that Patty Murray, speaking of like our personal biases, I'll put mine on the table. I worry about that stuff. And I think Patty Murray's ads and her concern are well placed and probably pretty effective.
Jonathan, in reaction?
Obviously the Dobbs decision for the Supreme Court was the best gift that for the Democrats could have gotten on the electoral issue. Really energized the Democratic base. Patty Murray's also is she 5 terms now? Joni might know, 4 terms. This might be going for a 5th term. She's been consistently quite popular, and Patty. So okay. 1992, I think, was her first came in. Right. Yeah. She's consistently pretty popular. The polling has been was a little bit tighter earlier in the race. I think pre-Dobbs, it was a little dicier maybe, but she's done a lot to endear herself to voters over the years. I don't know. I just thought that sort of this GOP playbook, as Erica rightly said, is sort of this national strategy of these urban liberal hellholes. Just kind of feels like a little bit of a yawn to me. It doesn't feel like it's a particularly inventive technique to go after somebody like Patty Murray, who's so entrenched and has a record to run on.
On the topic of what Seattle is doing about some of the issues that Republicans like Tiffany Smiley decry, Erica, Seattle pays people, human service providers, and the mayor has reversed himself and is now proposing not to raise their pay to match inflation. Why that reversal?
Well, first of all, Bill, great segue.
Nice job. I counted 3.
I guess it kind of ruins it by calling it out. So,
Right.
So the mayor proposes the budget. The Seattle Council, disposes it, and basically the city a couple of years ago, when Bruce Harrell was on the council, voted that to require human services contracts to go up by the rate of inflation. The intent being that people working for those organizations, which include homelessness organizations, would get a raise worth at least inflation, so their wages wouldn't slip, on a perpetual basis as they had been. Harrell made a big statement at the time and actually added an amendment emphasizing that this was intended for times of not just times of plenty, but also times of economic downturn, which we're in now. So fast forward 3 years, Harrell is mayor, and he wants to cap those mandatory increases at 4%, which would essentially require the council to overturn that law that they just passed and that Harrell supported. So, I asked him about this at a recent press conference, and he said, basically, this is not contradictory because we are, trying to prioritize those folks by giving them something of a bump, but, we've got to balance all these competing priorities. So I do think that's a contradiction because a bump of 4% is actually, a decrease in real wages. They would be getting a 7.6% increase this year. So I think
Erica,
that's going to be a battle.
what kind of jobs are these? Can we give just a few?
Yeah, we're talking about like people making, $20 an hour, $20 an hour, going out on the streets and doing outreach to direct street outreach to people in crisis. People, the folks that, you see on the streets experiencing mental health breakdowns, trying to get people into treatment, trying to get people into shelter. I mean, these are, by and large, some very, very long hours, low paid jobs that have incredibly high burnout. And, when we talk about the attrition at places like the jail and the police department and high turnover, I mean, that's happening with these emergency service workers too. We don't talk about it as much. They're not direct city employees, but they have incredibly high turnover and, very low rate of institutional knowledge. People just come and they leave because they burn out, and the wages just, aren't worth it.
Jonathan?
Yeah, Erica is right. If you think about what problem Bruce Harrell is trying to solve in the human services system, a lot of it goes to the staffing. I know they have beds they bought, and I think this might be county as well. The county bought hotels, and they haven't been able to open the beds because they don't have the staff to do it. So if what we know we need is a more robust homeless services system, when you don't have the bodies to fulfill it, to fill the jobs and deliver the services, then it makes me wonder if this is sort of a kind of a move to kind of, cut off your nose to spite your face kind of move. I also was curious, and I don't cover the city budget like Erica does, but going back to the growth and then a budget for the show, looking back at went back and looked over the sort of the history of how much the budget of the city has grown. The discretionary fund in 2015-16 was $1 billion, and now it's up to $1.6 billion. It's real money that the city has grown, and this is obviously the real estate boom really helped fatten the coffers of the city. But I'm just kind of wondering about that's an increase that's much higher than inflation. Wondering about what the city's budget hole is really about.
Well, look, this is the first time in a while that the city and I don't know if this applies to the state yet, but we're in a downturn. They haven't really played their budgets like that because everything was growth. I will be redundant here if I say we need more workers, and some of them might be migrants. And then, I just think that, the budget has grown, and then you have a mayor and a council facing, oh my gosh, this is one of those years where we have to do the opposite of what we've been doing. And it's uncomfortable. And I do think these folks should be paid fair wages. That's for sure.
Erica, final word on this?
Well, the city, I mean, what is the budget growth amounted to? I mean, it's been, programs that the city has instituted, equitable development programs to sort of try to reverse policies of the past that have, been discriminatory. And policing. I mean, the budget for the police has increased year over year, and they're not seeing much of a real cut this year because they're investing their cuts back into other SPD programs. So, I mean, the city does more than it used to, for sure. And the question is, do we want to do without those services that the city has come to depend on, or as is happening right now, figure out a way to cut without cutting, essentially.
Yes, and we're talking about, I think, Erica, you wrote it's $140 million budget gap, and one of the proposals there is to take some of the money from the Jumpstart tax, this payroll tax that it was earmarked for housing, Green New Deal programs, equitable development, small businesses. And Eric, I know you wrote this week about proposal and some pushback among the city council on the idea of using the Jumpstart tax for money that it was not earmarked for. I've got to put a pin in that because there are a couple other things I want to talk about before we leave Week in Review. Okay, the topic that I wanted to get to is that earlier in the show we were talking about the King County's unfulfilled goal of zero youth incarceration. Well, here's another one: zero traffic deaths. Vision Zero is this goal that many local governments have signed on to, including Seattle. Nevertheless, traffic deaths have instead gone up, Jonathan, particularly in Pierce County. Your newspaper did a focus on the county situation, and what is the wider takeaway from what Pierce County is going through when it comes to a lack of traffic safety?
Yeah, this is a really good story by David Croman on our traffic lab team. He looked at Pierce County because it was the highest jump in pedestrian deaths over some time. Most jurisdictions in control saw a jump in pedestrian deaths during the pandemic, which is interesting because theory is we were not out as much in the pandemic, at least early on, but it seems that in deaths has now continued post-pandemic. The theory is that David said is that people got used to driving faster in the pandemic, empty roads going faster, and they liked going faster and they keep going faster. There's some other theories too about one theory being there maybe is more incapacitated people. It's obviously there's no way of quantifying that. But I like to focus on Pierce County. I grew up in eastern Pierce County, way at the far end of the exurbs, and drove through the endless sprawl of eastern Pierce County a lot. And you think about what it would take to reduce pedestrian deaths in those like 6-lane or 8-lane municipal streets that function like highways. And for one thing, it requires a political will to do it, make people go slower. And then it's also expensive to solve these, the urban planning problems on streets that are already built. You do things like have to raise crosswalks, a lot more long signage, medians. So it'd be expensive to bring that real urban vision zero urbanist approach to making pedestrians safer. And you wonder in Pierce County if there's the will to do it.
Yeah, and one more I thought important aspect of this that the story brought up was that many of these large arterials and highways were laid when it was a much more rural area, and now you've got this fast growth. So you've got these zooms bumping up against, suddenly there's a school there, there's a shopping center there. Jonathan, you're breaking up a little bit. So we heard almost all of what you said. I just want to turn it over to Joni and Erica for any more reaction to this idea of zero traffic deaths, Seattle and beyond, and then the reality.
Well, so the idea of zero traffic deaths is fantastic. The problem is that they're increasing. And my first reaction to these is usually, it's all those distracted drivers trying to sneak onto their phones. And there's a fair amount of that going on, but there's more than that. And I feel like, and I read through the story and I was thinking about it because I think about this quite a bit. I feel like it's the bigger cars and the density in these new areas. And I'll give you an example. And also, I kind of want to blame some traffic apps. I'll give you the example of Lake Washington Boulevard. And one of the traffic apps noted, I think it was Waze, but I'm not sure, one of them said, this is a way to go north-south without lights. Yes, but it's a very, very narrow street. And there are a ton of bikes on there. And there are a ton of pedestrians on there. But here's people trying, and you can see it because it's commuter times. Here's people trying to flood that street because they're not going to have a traffic light. And it's pretty dangerous out there sometimes, it seems. And so I do think that you have this, this goal, which is, we all agree we want to accommodate folks on bikes and people walking. And yet on the other hand, we're telling drivers, here's how you can go faster. And in more places that now have more people.
So, I mean, I think that I agree that completely unurban planning Pierce County is impossible at this point. But, I think that, and I think that the problems that exist in Seattle are exactly the same as the problems that exist in Pierce County, just on a different level of development. I mean, we can slow down roads. We can add more crosswalks or more signed intersections, more lights. We can narrow roads. That these are all things that, yes, they are somewhat expensive, but they are doable. They do require political will. I think, it's tempting always to blame, individual drivers. And I certainly get mad at drivers all the time myself as a frequent pedestrian. But when you have road design, and I'm not talking about urban planning, but just road design that, encourages people to drive fast, it's going to happen whether you're talking about Rainier Avenue South, which is a state highway for some of its length, or our 4-lane highway in Pierce County. I mean, you can slow it down like the city has done in Seattle and in Columbia City, or you can, allow it to be a place that encourages people to drive really fast. And I think those are decisions that, that municipalities and counties, can make. It's just that they're often unpopular because people do like to drive fast.
Hey everyone, I've got speaking of fast, I've got a text from Julio Rodriguez, who's about to start a playoff game, and he's hooked on the show. It's a driveway moment, but he's saying, can you wrap this up so that I can go play the Blue Jays? So we're going to take a short break, and then we'll let finish this up so the team can take the field. But we'll be right back.
It's 12:55. BBC NewsHour begins at 1 o'clock on 94.9 KUOW. It is 70 degrees in Seattle, going to be a sunny, somewhat hazy afternoon with a high of 74.
Hi, I'm Mike Davis from the KUOW newsroom. Kelly from Auburn recently gave and said, because there are fewer newsrooms out there, she feels a heck of a lot better knowing that KUOW is out there representing everyone who wants and needs to know what's going on. Thank you, Kelly. You keep the work we accomplish together moving forward.
Support for KUOW comes from Puget Sound Psychotherapy and Psychiatry, where clinicians are dedicated to rigorous personal and professional growth to provide care for children and adults. Appointments available. More information at pspseattle.com.
KUOW's Week in Review, and it's time to leave you with something to smile about. First of all, we're doing the show live on a Friday. It gets repeated over the weekend, but as of now, the Mariners are just a few minutes away from playing their first playoff game in, I think, 21 years. And I'm smiling that the Mariners are in the playoffs. I just wanted to check in with you all because I feel... Of course, I want the Mariners to, I hope they go to the World Series and everything. It seems very promising that they made the playoffs, but I'm getting this sense of triumphalism in Seattle as if the Mariners have already done something. And I don't want to be the curmudgeon, except they won 90 games. They won just a little under 56% of their games. It's not bad, but they are in the playoffs because the baseball has continued to expand the number of teams that make it into the playoffs. They finished like 5th in the American League. So it's great. I'm happy that they're in the playoffs. I'm hopeful. Go Mariners and all that. I feel like I'm a little out of sync with Seattle. It's like you go to a Christmas party and they're singing Auld Lang Syne. It's still happy, but it seems a little early. It's promising. I'm just going to say I'm glad and I feel hope and promise, not yet triumph. Go on.
Okay, so you're right, Bill, that Seattle is treating this playoff berth like it's winning the World Series. But can you let us do that? Because that's what's making us smile.
Okay,
that
is my job. That's what we do.
Now, we are underdogs, but here's what's cool about it. Here's the big smile. You know, this is one of those special moments in history, and you can think about it like 1995, like 2001, like I think it was 2014 with the Super Bowl win. What this does is it helps us transcend our differences. Sometimes we're a divided city.
Yeah.
This is something we can all agree on and, laugh when you tell a joke about Julio calling you, unless he really did, which maybe he did. But, think about it. I mean, I had a family where sometimes the only thing I could talk to them about was sports. And Seattle's a big family. It's like the bigger family. And this is something we can talk to each other about, and maybe we couldn't talk about some of those other topics.
Yes, totally agree. Look, we've got like 30 seconds left. Who wants to weigh in before we say goodbye?
I really appreciate the contrarian take. I appreciate that you're willing to be the curmudgeon.
Okay.
And, this is a team that was down in the dumps in June and made this incredible turnaround. It's a fun team. It doesn't feel like a team with very many jerks or bad dudes or whatever. So I agree with Joni. I'll be watching.
We're all together on that. Erica, anything to add? I know you love sports.
I just appreciate everybody not making me talk about sports.
I know, because we're out of time. That's how I designed it.
Love hearing your thoughts, though.
Failed you out. All right, that is Erica Barnett, Publicola's co-founder and editor. From the Seattle Times, you've got investigations editor Jonathan Martin and political analyst, contributing columnist Joni Balter. Love you guys. Thanks. Go M's, and thank you for being our show this week. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks.
Thanks to Kevin Kniestead and Juan Pablo Chiquiza and Tio Popescu and Kevin Kniestead, and we'll see you again in a week. Go Mariners.
KUOW-FM.
One second.
Hi, thank you.
Mike's on.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry for my mic trouble. Thank you. Great show. Thanks a lot for that.
Thanks, John.
Sorry, I was cutting people off and kind of ditching topics and sliding you all and all that kind of stuff.
No, we just
keep
had a
on
lot
time.
to say. I think that's good. That's a plus, you know.
I wanted to check in and see how you all are feeling about, and any answer is okay, but how are you feeling about A, remote versus coming into the studio, and B, mask in the studio versus no mask?
Well, I'll tell you, the mask is important, you know, and I was thinking we wouldn't be masked a couple of weeks ago, whenever it was, but let's be honest, we got a note from one of the participants a couple of days later that she had COVID. So weren't you glad, Bill, that we had masks?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about, go ahead, Eric.
I really I just prefer remote because a lot of times I'm recording multiple things on Fridays. I somehow managed to get myself like only booked on Fridays on stuff. And, you know, we do our podcast. So, but I can make either work. Okay. And I'm fine to wear like a thin mask that I don't think really interferes with the way it sounds. I mean, it can't sound worse than, you know, home recording studios, right? Right.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm in the office most of the week. You know, I'm fine coming in the office when we have big groups. We sometimes wear masks, but not always. You know, it's all good with me.
Are you saying if regarding coming in, just this week was hard, or in general, are you like, if I'm still going to be on the show, I'm going to be remote? Because you know, we get voice breakups and, you know, all that kind of, that's just, you know.
Well, to be honest with you, I'm home because I wanted to watch the Mariners. I'm off today.
Yes.
Day off, and I'm here home to watch the Mariners. So
yeah.
So I wouldn't mind coming in though. I like seeing you.
Well, we did have a great time together that day.
We did. We went in studio the last 2 weeks, and it's just it's great. It's great. You know, we sound great. We can see each other. It's a different way of interacting. People just jump in and talk more fluidly. But, you know, but everyone's got a different situation for whatever reason. So we kind of want to know where you all stand and how you're feeling. So anyway, I guess I'll let you go watch the Mariners game. But anything to add?
No, I'm not opposed, and I always you know, I'll always give in to peer pressure. So on most of these, everybody's sort of said, well, I'm going to stay home, and I've been like, okay, that's fine. But you know, if folks are coming in, I'm happy to come in too. Okay. Well, thanks for letting me know that. I can ask more specifically, you know, by email if there's an upcoming show or whatever. But we're in that transition phase where we, you know how it is. We all are.
It's a weird phase right now. I'm trying to run meetings where like half people are in that room and the other half are remote, and like it's just like hybrid meetings are just a shit show. It's just not
hybrid classes that I teach are a shit show.
Yeah.
Bill, I'm willing to do either. I'll probably wear a mask if the sound isn't horrible.
Yeah, we've been told that I think it sounds fine. And, you know, been doing it 2 weeks. I heard anyway, you get the idea. I think it sounds fine, but we'll see how it goes. Go enjoy the game. Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure this week, and we'll do it soon, I hope.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Fun to be on with you guys.
Bye.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.